Okay, we live in a society, which I may jump ahead in our conversation, in which we allow a president to do Mr. Trump, to do remarkable things. One, to constantly misspeak about tariffs. By now it's intentional, because we're going to hit the Chinese. Chinese people don't pay our tariffs. We do. The tariff is a tax on imports. All right? That means the Republican Party, for 100 years, the party advocating tax cuts, has become overnight a party championing taxes, namely tariffs. That already ought to make people go, what's going on here? But he slides out from that by having large numbers of Americans, all the polls show it, think that the tariff is paid by the people over there, not America. It isn't. It's real simple. It isn't. But number two, he never tells you what are the, how do I put this? What are the negatives? What are the side effects of a tariff? Now, tariffs have been around for centuries. There is an immense literature in economics about tariffs. There's nothing new about it. There's nothing unheard of. If you take a course in international trade, in any economics program that I'm familiar with, and I'm familiar with a lot of them, I've taught this material. You teach it. There's a segment of the course about tariffs. And what you do is you teach when are tariffs used, what do they achieve, what are the problems, what are the negative and positive, and they're both side effects. But we have a president who talks about this is a win-win-win-win situation. This is moronic. It doesn't understand the literature, which never says that. It doesn't understand even what it is doing, and it's a continual fooling of the people into thinking that, we're going to reshore, bring industry back because we're going to make it too expensive for them to. Yes, there'll be some of that, but there'll be all these other things which the literature is full of, because these are lessons that have been learned by people who did this. All of this is magicked away. It's a stunning, and that Mr. Trump, he doesn't understand it. It's clear to me, because if he did, the level of lying, maybe he's capable of it, but I'll give him the benefit of that. I find that hard to understand. But that the New York Times and the others, Paul Krugman writes for the New York Times. He's a Nobel critic, and his specialty is international trade. He knows. Come on. And many like him know. But there's this America, and that's again the legacy of the Cold War. You don't. Even this weird Trump character, because these are often liberals, I don't like him. They can't bring themselves to be reasonably critical. That may change, but for the moment, I'm here explaining the economics of tariffs to people. I do it all the time, because they ask all the time. And you should see them in the audiences, they're all. That's because I'm telling them something that they don't know. And that's not their fault. That should be, what are you doing, mister? Why are you doing a tariff when you know that, yes, you will protect the jobs of the immediately affected, but there are all these other consequences. What? It's like announcing I'm taking over the Panama Canal. You can't do that because of the ramifications. What are you? You've been denouncing Mr. Putin for 3 years, that he invaded another country and took something that isn't his. You just announced you're going to do that. What? What do you think that has? You don't have to worry. You just met a tough guy. Stop. This isn't serious. But with him, this exaggerated bluster got him the election because it's the naughty boy. And he's being naughty again. and the whole world is more naughty, and it works. But man, those negative side effects, they don't go away because you pretend they're not there. That's like the little child, and I did this with you, I'm sure. The little 3-year-old confronts the scary doggy in the park, and he or she puts their little hands in front of their eyes because they think if they can't see the dog, it won't be there. But by the time they're 4 or 5 years old, they have learned the lesson. You can do that, the doggy's still there. Mr. Trump and this country are engaged in levels of denial that I look at it and I go, wow. What is going on in a society that would do this? Why self-delude? What possible? And if we, as I believe, well, I hope we do, talk about the internal contradictions of the economic program of Mr. Trump, then you'll see that this is what I've just told you. It's all over the place. Not just with tariffs, but with deporting immigrants and so on. You know, the secondary consequences here ought to make any rational government stop. And the fact that this government isn't stopping, well, draw the conclusion. Let me try to illustrate the contradictions, internal craziness of what is being proposed. And I'm going to do that in 2 ways. I'm going to use what we in economics call supply and demand analysis, a very simple-minded approach we teach students as a beginning to understanding economics. And then I'm going to also use the Marxian economics idea of surplus, which gives you insights that the supply and demand apparatus doesn't. Okay. The president says, and has already in the first weeks of his administration, illustrated dramatically that he is going to deport undocumented immigrants, of which the Homeland Security Department of this country says we have somewhere around 12 million, 10 to 15 million, somewhere in there. Okay, let's take a look at what this might mean. Mostly these are undocumented immigrants, are young people of working age. Yes, some of them bring children when they come, but most don't. And some of them bring their elderly, but most don't. These are young men and women who can travel through the desert and take the hardships that are involved in coming here for many. So they arrive here and they take the worst jobs. And by worst jobs, I don't just mean those that are poorly paid, although that's the majority of them. I mean jobs that are dangerous, jobs that are irregular, jobs for employers that are highly unscrupulous much of the time. And the reason they have those jobs is because, unlike a native-born worker, they will never go to the police to complain if they're made to work without protective gear, or they're made to work too many hours, or they're made to work without being given the pay that they were promised when they undertook the job. Employers know that they can get away with this because they've been doing that forever, for time immemorial, which means that the immigrant is particularly profitable as an employee because you can rip them off, basically. And that's one of the reasons that the United States has always welcomed employees because the employers knew you could do things with them you couldn't otherwise. I could go on. You also cram these people into the worst neighborhoods with the lousiest housing, again, because they cannot and will not complain. They will not demand what is legally available to them for fear that it will blow their cover and they will be hassled by the police. The police don't treat them very well, again, for the same reasons, and so on. So, I'm not going to mention what it means to target these people, many of whom have spent years at the bottom of the jobs pyramid in the United States. What it means exactly, ethically or morally, to pick them up off the street, put them in shackles, which is being done now, and dropping them in Mexico or Colombia or wherever you can impose that. How this squares with Christian, Jewish, Muslim, or any other religious system I know of, I leave to the mysteries of how human beings are religious, extraordinary. But I'm not going to focus on that. Here's the supply and demand. You are reducing the supply of labor. You're literally taking people who had offered and delivered labor effort, brains and muscles, 8 hours a day or more, across the United States. Millions of them are being withdrawn from the labor market. So the supply of workers is being cut. You know, if you're going to get rid of 10 million people, it's going to make an impact. On the other hand, you're going to impose tariffs, meaning that goods produced abroad will no longer be purchased by Americans because they become more expensive. Mr. Trump has said, and by the time this airs, he may well have imposed 25% tariffs on both Canadian and Mexican goods. And again, I'm not, wow. That's what he said. And he had promised to do that earlier, so they're consistent. That violates the treaties that were initially signed by Mr. Clinton, the NAFTA, and then rewritten and re-signed by Trump himself in his first presidency with a new name. But it's basically a common market between the United States, Canada to the north, Mexico to the south, and it meant that goods could move between them without tax, no tax being applied by any of the three countries to any of the other. He's abrogating that. He's not having a conference to discuss it. He's not having meetings with the leadership to talk. He unilaterally abrogating, which is the politest way you can put this, violating would be another term, this treaty with our two neighbors. Interesting move. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to assume it goes through in one form or another. The United States is the major market for both of those countries. Therefore, this is a big blow to them because they're going to see the demand for their exports to the United States drop because an American has to pay his own government, the American government, the tariff, the tax, and that makes it more expensive in the manner I just went through with the electric car from China. So it's going to hurt them. And Mr. Trump never discusses the hurt done to them, deals with them as if they're bad people, and says this is all done because they allow fentanyl to come through their countries into the United States. Notice, the bad guy is the one who allows the movement, not the country to which the movement is directed, because Americans buy and consume that stuff on a record level. Nope, none of that. Interesting. No, Mr. Trump says it's also, he admits, to reshore America, right? Because if it's too expensive to bring the object from Canada in, or from Mexico in, the hope is that the producer will come back to the United States, make it inside, because then there's no tariff that's applicable. All right, I'm not going to discuss the obvious, and I'm glad you're smiling, because it really is childishly obvious, that a producer in Canada or Mexico would be nuts to come here right away, because he doesn't know how long Mr. Trump will stay with this policy. He doesn't know whether it'll disappear when Mr. Trump disappears. And it's very expensive. So, we also don't know whether the company affected like this will leave Mexico and go across its southern border into Guatemala, another place which doesn't have a tariff. But then it can't risk doing that because Mr. Trump will put the tariff on against the Guatemalan goods. So let's assume that some reshoring takes place. Some companies at the margin will come in to the United States and produce here at home, the ostensible goal and purpose of all of this. That would mean an increase in the demand for labor, because those companies, instead of hiring Mexican and Canadian workers, by coming back, would be hiring American workers, which is the ostensible purpose. Okay, the supply of labor is going down and the demand for labor is going up. What is that supposed to do with demand and supply analysis? Answer: it's going to raise wages. A lot. Why? Because you can't rip off American-born workers the way you ripped them. So you're going to have to pay wages you never thought you'd have to. So wages will go up in the United States. Now let's take it 2 more steps and we're done. Why would capitalists across America who supported Mr. Trump welcome that the cost of labor is going up and eating into their profits?
Seems like a contradiction.
But we're not done. Because when Mr. Trump imposes a tariff, one of the results, the textbooks are full of this, is called retaliation. Other countries can put tariffs just like we can, which means American companies who export are going to have the same problem. They're not going to have a market the way they used to because the countries retaliate. They put a tariff on goods from America, and they've said it. If you tariff us, we will retaliate. So the companies will have higher wages to pay, and while they can't sell the way they used to. That's a 1-2 punch right in the nose of the employer class. They're the ones who gave him the job. That's not his job in their minds. How's he going to handle what I just described? What? Not only that, but if you put a tariff and the prices go up, what the literature teaches is that the protected companies, the ones who like it that you put a tariffs so your Canadian competitor can't compete with you anymore, and your Mexican competitor can't. What you induce the Americans say, great, I can raise my prices. Because even if I raise them 10%, they've stuck the Canadians with 25% tariff. Everyone's going to have to pay me my 10% more because it's still better than the alternative they can get. You know what that means? You're going to get an inflation. Is it possible that other things, which I don't have the time, but if you want to, we can go there, that other things will neutralize what I just said? That's possible. That's what I meant by a Hail Mary pass. What he's doing is ridiculous economically. And so maybe his rejoinder, or someone who's smarter than him might be able to do, is to say, yes, but if this, and this happen, well, and that's possible. It's always possible. But it's not the logical thing to expect. And to expect it from someone who never mentions any of these things, even though, as I hope I've showed you, they're as simple as apple pie. There are no mystery here. There's nothing complicated. And the literature about these things is full of all of this. Not a word of what I just said to you is original to me. Not at all. So all I can tell you is, with this level of contradiction at the basis of what is being proposed here, you're looking at a really strange phenomena unfolding. Now let me show you from a Marxian economics perspective, another remarkable thing, which also touches American history and which I'm really interested in conveying to your audience. A working age immigrant, which is what most of the undocumented immigrants in the United States today are, is a gift to the United States. It is a subsidy to the United States. It is very weird to be ejecting this gift. It really is like a neighbor bringing you a lovely apple pie, and while they're there, you're saying, "Oh, thank you," and then you throw it in the garbage. I mean, whoa, that's bizarre. What are you doing? Why do I say that? Well, take a 20-year-old Guatemalan young woman comes across the border. An enormous amount of money has been spent on that 20-year-old young woman before she crosses the border in Texas and enters the United States as an undocumented immigrant. She has had to be fed for 20 years. That costs money. She's had to be clothed for 20 years. That costs money. She's had to be sheltered. She had to be educated to a certain amount, whatever they have where she comes from. Those are enormous expenses. Every society has such expenses for the citizens before they reach working age. Think of it this way. When they work, they produce, they create value. Until they work, they absorb it. That's what we do for our children. Guatemala picked up the cost. The United States had no cost. We didn't feed them, we didn't raise them, nothing. The Guatemalans did that for free from the American point of view. Not from them, they had a real expenditure. They had to produce the food, clothing, and shelter that they gave to their children. We didn't, we get them only when they're ready to work. Now, in Marxian theory, when they work, let's assume they're paid $10 an hour. Maybe I should assume $7.25, because that's the minimum wage in this country, the federal minimum wage. They get paid $7.25 per hour. It's clear and easy to show that for most of them, in an hour, they produce, by their labor, either a greater quantity or a better quality of an output, whatever they're hired to do. You know, fold laundry, wash your car, whatever. Which means, now I'm using the Marxian system, they produce a surplus. Mm-hmm. No one is going to hire them for $7.25 unless doing so makes the employer more than $7. That's the rationale. Marx worked this out, so I have to give him credit. Otherwise, I would be acting as though I had figured this out, which I didn't. So the immigrant brings to the United States a costless worker who immediately goes to work. How else are they going to survive? producing a surplus for the employer who hires him. A better surplus, proportionally, than he could get from a native-born worker, which is why he hired him. Okay. This is an enormous gain to the United States economy. Not a loss, a gain. Dwarfs all the rest of the BS. Right? Does this worker get drunk sometime? Absolutely. Do they occasionally commit a crime? Of course. FBI tells us they commit crimes less than native-born, which I'm not surprised, because they're undocumented and they can't risk it. So this is a subsidy. Here comes the history. The United States' greatness as a capitalist system over the last century was dependent upon its ability to absorb wave after wave of the subsidy to this economy represented by immigrants. Deporting them is a sign of weakness. Deporting them means you can't get the subsidy. It's the equivalent of having high tech get billions of subsidy from Washington and saying, oh, no thanks, don't want it. Whoa, never gonna happen. No company would be so stupid. And we're not stupid, so what's going on? We can't. We can't do anymore what we once did. What we once did was to say to the immigrant, come here. Yeah, we'll give you the crappiest jobs. Yeah, we'll stick you in the ghetto, slum neighborhoods. Yeah. But within a reasonable amount of time, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, we'll be bringing in another wave, and they will be slipped in under you, and you will be able to rise. The crappiest jobs will now be given to them, the new immigrants. You will be able to go to the next level. A nicer neighborhood, a better school, better apartment, and all of it. And not only that, we'll make a mythology about it. It'll be called American exceptionalism, and it will focus on the remarkable social mobility that can be achieved. Horatio Alger, from poor immigrants, you will write all of that theater. We can't do it anymore. We can't. We're going to have to persuade Americans, native-born, to live in the crappy housing, to accept the crappy job. No more Horatio Alger mythology. And you know what that's about? That's the weakness of American capitalism. That's the end of the empire and the profits it made. It's because the dollar isn't the universal currency anymore. It has to share that role with the Japanese yen or the Chinese yuan or the European euro. It's over. The empire's finished. But we can't say it. We can't face it. We can't talk about it as a nation. The president is acting like he's going to tell I'm taking Greenland and I'm changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico. What childish theater was that? And so go back to the beginning of our conversation. That's why all this is irrelevant, because it's so detached from what is actually at stake here. It is so full of the bluster. I'm going to tariff this one. Europeans ask me, why the focus on the tariff? And I say to them, I want to do the whole analysis, so I don't usually have the time. You give me the time, for which I am grateful. But the short answer to the Europeans is, when he was the president the first time, everything he tried to do was blocked by the Democrats or by lawsuits or by this. One of the few things he could just do is a tariff. Because Congress some years ago passed a law giving the president this odd power to use this tool unilateral. He doesn't have to get anybody's permission. He can just do it. Right? So he realized that, so the answer to why he's using tariffs is because he can. Not because it's the right tool, not because it's the best tool. It's because he can be Mr. Trump throwing thunderbolts like Zeus, in mythology. So that's why we're all talking about tariffs. We, as a culture, we don't know anything about it. The thing, people are saying, if I were a nastier person, I would have a field day just mocking the officials who keep talking about tariffs, starting with Mr. Trump, because it's all the behavior of someone, the speech of someone who doesn't know what they're talking. It's not even, I don't blame him. He doesn't know anything. He shouldn't speak about what you don't know, because it's gonna come back and haunt you, and it will. It will. The Canadians are now going to have to react, and the Mexicans react, and I haven't even gone into that with you. Mexico, let's do that. Just one more. Mexico. We are going to deport, mostly to Mexico, Latino undocumented immigrants, which is the largest group. And most of those will go to Mexico. Okay. Let's do the simple economics. Those people had jobs here in the United States, and one of the things they did with their wages, low as they are, was to send a portion back to their families in Mexico, to help care for their children they left behind, to help care for their elderly they left behind. Those things are called remittances in economics. But when you have millions of people, then they become an important part of your economy. Many of the villages of Mexico will be seriously impacted by the end of the remittances, which will happen when that immigrant who sent them is deported. He won't be working anymore, or she won't, and be able to send home. That's going to hurt the Mexican economy, number one. Now, number two, a tariff. Much of the industry in Mexico sells to the United States. They're going to suffer terribly by the closing of the American market, because Americans are not going to pay those tariffs to get those Mexican. By the way, this includes basic things like home appliances, automobiles. Large numbers of automobiles in America, Ford, General Motors, come from Mexico, where they are produced or assembled. So Mexican industry is going to be hurt in its exports to the United States, and so they're going to have to lay off Mexican workers, which will increase unemployment. And now the last part, but the returning deportees will make that unemployment that much worse. Remittances stop, exports hurt, and a flood of people with no jobs. Mexico is a poor country. This is impossible. You're going to you think you have a problem with the drug gangs of Mexico now? You're going to produce, maybe Mr. Trump's hidden agenda is to annex all of Mexico and make it the 52nd state after he takes Canada. Maybe, look. And maybe he'll be forced into that by the very consequences of what he's doing. He is savaging Mexico. And we have, I don't know, 1,000-mile border with Mexico. Is that a very smart thing to do? Most people wouldn't think so. Where's the conversation? There is none. There is none. The closest you get are the statements of Mrs. Sheinbaum, the new leader of Mexico, who's got some courage and is pushing back. The Canadians folded, but not the Mexicans, so we'll see. But talk about contradictions. I hope I've given you a flavor of some of them.
A recurring idea in the conversation at this point is that Trump is the naughty boy. And as I think I've brought this up in many of our past conversations because it's impossible to avoid, that you are probably the most gifted rhetorician and natural thespian, since you mentioned theater, that I've met in my life. And this is a skill set that both of you, the two of you, have in common. And
Maybe that's why I see it in him,
Yeah.
It's visible in everyone but yourself.
yeah, that's funny. And Victor Davis Hanson, enter again, as long as we're using theater parlance. And we spoke about some of Trump's rhetorical tactics. And maybe he would be okay with the phrase naughty boy, but he thinks of Trump's rhetoric as extremely skillful and useful, and he appealed to the art of the deal and made cases for why some of these moves you've discussed were extremely useful. And I think these are still very topical talking points, and they're funny and interesting. So since you've mentioned them, I'd like to go through them one by one.
Okay.
First, what is the motivation behind or idea behind suggesting that we should make Canada the 51st state? Why would Trump say that? Is it useful? Was it skillful? Did it produce anything?
No, I don't think so. For me, I don't see any, again, and I would be interested in someone like Mr. Hanson, if he could, show me why that is a skillful strategic move. I don't see it. I see this as bluster, that Mr. Trump has discovered that this bluster is effective. And I think there's a psychological reason. I think he speaks for an awful lot of people who are frustrated, Americans I'm talking about, frustrated, bitter, angry, and yet don't have the time, the energy, the interest, the education to do very much with their anger. So they bluster too. Over one too many beers, these Canadians, they are whatever. It normally it wouldn't be taken as much. But when he blusters, it validates their bluster. And that's his function. I think that's what he's doing. And he may be aware of it. I don't know if he's aware of it. My guess is he is. You remember early on in his career, he liked to say, I could go out on Fifth Avenue and shoot someone, and people would still applaud what I'm doing. He stumbled onto a connection. His own life and that of large numbers of people. They vibrated together. He was dismissed by the upper echelons of American corporate society. He was, a gifted child. That is, the father left a lot of money to the kid, his father, who had real estate in Brooklyn, and left a chunk of money to his son. So the claim that he worked hard to make his money is silly, and that was used against him a lot. He suffered from that. He's none too bright, so he didn't do very well in school, or he is bright and he spent time grabbing parts of anatomy and drinking too much, and so there wasn't much there. He got out of the army by his bone spurs and doesn't look very good. And the ruling elites his crudeness, he didn't learn at the university what so many people do, how to act. I had to learn that it was important to get a tweed jacket when I went to college. It was important to get a tweed jacket with a leather patch over here, whether I needed it or not. I learned how to speak. If you think I speak well, I did. I learned how to. My parents are immigrants. They were not adepts at the English language. I didn't speak English until I was 5. I spoke German and French. But I did learn a certain way of acting, a certain way presenting myself. I don't think he ever did. He was naughty in various ways as he grew up, and was therefore an outsider and bitter about it, not able to break in, and associate. His daughter marries the son of another real estate dealer who's in jail. This is not, what is this? This is very strange. So I think he's belligerently angry at an establishment that excluded him. And that gives him a solidarity with masses of Americans who are also belligerently angry at another establishment that they feel rejects them. And they get a lot of that, but I don't deny that for a minute. There are an awful lot of people who, like Mr. Hansen, live in the world of the elites, and they feel one group is problematic because they think they are the elites, and the other group is problematic because they think they're oppressed by an elite. I disagree with the analysis out of which both positions come. I have no idea what elite means. If you're talking in the generalities, it's usually presented. I don't know what it means. People in California and New York work in different industries, have different communities, and see the world somewhat differently than if you live in Arkansas or Tennessee. I get that. Has always been true in this country. I don't, recasting it as, it's a game. I understand why you play it. I understand the purpose of it. I don't like it because I know where it can go. Well, it may not go there, I hope not, but I know where that can go. That's a little bit for me like listening to someone explain Larry Summers. Remember him?
He's been on the show.
Okay. He got himself into a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
When he was the president of Harvard. Gave a speech where he explained why women can't do science as well as men. Now, in my humble opinion, that's real stupid. Since I don't admire him, I don't mind saying, that's real stupid. But it lost him that position. It hurt him badly. But the interesting question for him, where would this come? What are you doing? Even if you believe that, what are you doing? Talking like that. Don't you have you don't know enough about American culture to know that at this day and age, in this society, you can't do that. Right? I mean, it says something about you, that you are way out of touch with the environment. It's astounding that is the qualification to be bounced out of Harvard. Not because you don't do economics, not because you can't run Harvard, and of course you can. But this is a level of some word, insensitivity, obtuseness, out of touchedness, that really disqualify me. Whoa. By the way, he said other things that you could also, maybe you know him, go after him about. So now it's possible, I don't know him personally, but it's possible he's naughty too. That there's a part of him that wants to be able to say such a thing, and it leaked out. He maybe wasn't all that careful. I don't know. I don't even know what he thinks about it in retrospect. But it's another example of, wow. And his mistake, unlike Trump's, Trump discovered the audience that responded positively. Poor Larry didn't. He delivered that dumbness to the wrong audience, in the wrong place, at the wrong time. And he got punished for it. Mr. Trump, had he tried that bluster up at Harvard, would have been shut down, or Yale or any of the other places. No. He understood where he goes. Look where he is now. His base is the South, parts of the Midwest, and those kinds of folks around elsewhere. But he learned who his supporters were, and he went there. Earlier he didn't understand that. Earlier he was a playboy in New York. His excitement was going to the Playboy Club. His excitement was being a junior member of the rich in New York City. He hated being junior all the time, which I get. And the naughtiness was encouraged by that. So he was angry about being excluded, and then was naughty, which assured his exclusion. And he was trapped in that contradiction without the ability, I don't know if he can spell contradiction, let alone use it analytically, but as one of the senators, whose name I forget, once said, there is no intelligence requirement to be a senator.
Yeah, it's a good one. Well, the second of these rhetorical topics that I wanted to address, you've already mentioned, but I think it might also be a good opportunity as a throwback to some of our earlier, more pedagogically focused episodes for a bit of an economics or a trade lesson. But what is the strategic importance of the Panama Canal for us, and why would Trump make the they're not hints, the claims about taking it as he has been?
Well, I'll give you the answer, but I'm not at all sure that the answer I'm giving you is why Mr. Trump did this. And I'm genuinely concerned not to be misunderstood on that point. I can make a better case for what he did than he has so far made.
Okay, interesting.
Here's my suspicion why he did it. Because it is a way of being naughty and tough. Jimmy Carter, I believe 1977, signed the documents that gave the canal to the sovereign independent country of Panama. Okay? So it violates, so he's naughty. He's violating the rules. He's the rule breaker, the new rule maker. Most Americans had no idea that there's an issue there. Number one.
What is the big issue there?
The only issue that I can see is part of an anti-China agenda. The number one country that uses the Panama Canal is the United States. The number two country is China. Because they're number one and two in a whole lot of areas. There's 1, 2. China has built, not surprisingly, a bunch of port facilities on either end of the canal. Buildings, and bought land and have establishments there. Chinese companies, and who may or may not be part of the Chinese government. So, American companies began some years ago to be a little bit worried about what is going on in these Chinese companies, which comes out of a fantasy, that's what I think it is, that the Chinese are aggressively moving into position to cause difficulties for the United States. I don't think that's true. I do think that the American empire is declining and that the Chinese either are going to be the next empire or, if we're lucky, will be the sponsor for a genuine multilateralism. We'll see. We don't know yet. I don't know yet, but I know no one else knows yet either. I do know that the United States everywhere is trying to stop, slow, constrain, and constrict China. The containment policy that they believe worked on Russia has now been adapted or extended to apply to China. That's why they held back the chips, which didn't succeed because of what happened with DeepSeek. All right? That's why they all of a sudden got interested in Taiwan again. That's why the Seventh Fleet is in South China Sea. So here the president can show he's doing something against China. Look, the problem is the United States' ability to slow down and stop China has so far proven to be zero. They can't do anything. I want to remind people who might question this, leading government spokesmen and women have been saying for at least 10 years, if not longer, that we, the Americans, need to put more pressure to constrict and constrain China. Didn't use those words, but that's what it amounted to. Why? Because the expectation, this is sort of the official line, the expectation in the minds of Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon when they went to China ended the refusal to recognize the government of China. Let's remember, the communists come to power in 1949, and Kissinger and Nixon go to China in 1970, early 70s. Okay, so, whoa, that's a long time. When you pretended they're not there, you would not send an ambassador, you would not receive an ambassador, all of that. What that meant was that the Japanese and the Europeans got to do productive and profitable trade with China. Americans were excluded. They didn't want that anymore, and so, okay, we'll open up. That was the real reason. Then the BS official was, this is going to help integrate China into the world economy, moving it closer to the liberal democracy that we have. It's hard for me to repeat this nonsense, but it's the official line. We were all supposed to wait for China to come around. When it came time to bring them into the World Trade Organization, which was necessary for the benefits to American companies of being able to deal with China, the same BS was recycled. By letting them into the World Trade, they would become more like us, which of course means freedom, democracy, apple pie, and baseball. Okay?
Good things.
Absolutely. Starting 10 or 15 years ago, it became clear, particularly to the kind of American politician who came to be known as a neocon, for good reason, began to realize that this strategy wasn't working, that it was enabling China to grow like blazes economically, but it wasn't becoming more like us at all. The Communist Party was still the controlling political element. It managed the state, and the state supervised a hybrid economy. One half private capitalist enterprise, one half government-owned enterprise, which is more or less the way it is now. And the neocons decided and used Clinton, Obama, and Biden to articulate. They persuaded them, so they became the Democratic Center, championed by Clinton. That China was a net enemy. Bringing them into the World Trade thing was too good for them. Number one, and number two, wasn't doing, which, by the way, some of them were honest enough to say, regime change, a liberal democratic parliamentary system. And so it became necessary to constrain and constrict and limit and punish and hurt them. And because of the legacy of the Cold War again, sitting down with the Chinese to try to say, look, you're a declining empire, we're a rising empire. We can come to blows over that. Lord knows human history gives us examples. Or we can try to find a way to share the planet. Let's at least try this sharing the planet. After all, the last quarter of the 20th century was a time when both the United States and China experienced pretty good economic growth together. The neocons smashed that. They didn't want that kind of talk. And we have to, it's crystal clear, like with the Soviet Union. And remember, the Soviet Union conveniently implodes in 1989. So there's the success. It worked. Reagan was able, we defeated them. Okay. So we have a plan how to do it. Do to the Chinese what we did to the Russians. Work with the Russians, it should work. So they're very upset now. It didn't. They didn't change anything. Now, of course, with half a brain, you might have said to yourself, China went from one of the poorest countries on earth in 1949 to a superpower, economically speaking, in 30 to 40 to 50 years. What incentive would there be for the government of a country that had that record to change itself? Are you crazy? That's their success. Enough. Give that up. What? It's crazy. It's a crazy thing to imagine that would happen. And it didn't happen, so they don't know that they made a mistake in their strategy. Americans can't do that. We made a mistake. No, never make a mistake. Like Mr. Trump, in that way he's not naughty. He always doubles down or tells us another story. But that's not unique to him. So the Panama Canal is a way to hit the Chinese, that's all. It says we may close it, we may not let you through. Now, could they do that anyway? Sure. What's the point? So here comes the theater. Holding back China is a complicated game because it's only half real. Because in the last 40 years, the Chinese not only grew, but the American dependency on China also grew for goods and services. Look, what you have to pay an American worker is much less than it would have been if you could not unload cheap Chinese consumer goods on everybody. Your pants, your shirt, your car, your toaster, your shaving equipment, it's all made in China, or was. Still most of it is. That cheapens the cost of living for working class people, which allows you to pay them less money because they can still go to the mall and pick up at Walmart or Target all of that junk, which comes from China and which is distributed in America by Walmart and Target. The marriage made in heaven. Now, those two companies have to be very careful never to say that. But if you look at it, it's no secret, it's easy to show. Walmart and China walk hand in hand for the last 50 years. They need each other dreadfully. Walmart is against all these tariffs. It doesn't want to have to charge the people who go to Walmart more money because it knows who those people are and it knows what this all means. Now that's true for Dollar General and dollar stores and all the rest of it. So American strategy is always split. You have to posture, punish, constrict, and constrain. But you have to also deal with the realities of it. And the Chinese know that. The Chinese are gambling. The time is on their side. They keep going. This year, I like to tell this to people because Americans don't know.